Welcome back to Research Expert Solutions. Today, we're diving into a fascinating piece of research that explores the heart of Zambia's economy, mining. The title of this study is The Economic and Social Impact of Mining Resources Exploitation in Zambia, authored by Raphael Aguirre Uncita from EU Can Aid in Brussels, Belgium. It was published in 2021 by the renowned Elsevier under the Resources Policy Journal. And let me tell you, this paper is an eye-opener. Now, imagine this: Zambia, a beautiful landlocked country in central southern Africa, often called the country of copper. For over a century, mining, especially copper mining, has been the backbone of its economy, dating back to colonial times. But here's the catch. Despite all that copper flowing out of Zambia to global markets, the country is still grappling with some serious challenges. Things like a sluggish economy, a lack of public services, and widespread poverty. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? With all those resources, why hasn't mining been a magic wand for Zambia's development? And that's exactly the puzzle Raphael Aguirre Uncita set out to solve. He based his analysis on something called AO, Hirschman's linkages theory, which is all about how industries, like mining, can create connections, or linkages, with other sectors of the economy to spark development. He also looked at the idea of the resource curse, a phenomenon where countries rich in resources sometimes end up worse off economically and socially. Strange, right? So, what did Raphael find? The results were, let's say, not exactly what you'd hope for. The benefits Zambia has gotten from its mining resources have been, well, modest at best. In some ways, they've even been harmful. And that big dream of turning mining into a springboard for development? It just hasn't happened. But why? Why hasn't mining lived up to its potential for Zambia? Well, stick around, because we're just getting started. In the next part of this exploration, we'll dig deeper into what went wrong and how public policies could step in to change the game. Stay tuned for more insights from this groundbreaking research. The study focuses on critical economic policy decisions surrounding Zambia's copper mines, tracing their nationalization shortly after the country gained independence in 1964, and their subsequent privatization at the start of the 21st century. Aguirre Uncita delves into the significant debate over whether mining, as a primary export sector, truly delivers benefits to Zambia and its population, using an analytical framework grounded in AO, Hirschman's theory of fiscal and productive linkages and elements of the resource curse thesis. Hirschman's theory, as employed by Aguirre Uncita, identifies three potential connections between Zambia's mining sector and the broader economy. These include fiscal linkages, which involve public revenues that could be redirected to other sectors for development, consumption linkages, arising from the local demand generated by wages paid in the mining sector, and productive linkages, both forward, adding value to exported commodities, and backward, procuring goods and services locally to support mining activities. While Hirschman acknowledges the limited domestic economic impact of capital-intensive, foreign-owned extractive industries, such as mining, he highlights that local policies can still activate these linkages. Aguirre Uncita builds on this premise to analyze Zambia's capacity to capture a fair share of mining revenue, while simultaneously ensuring productive investment of those funds. The study highlights the challenges Zambia faces in leveraging fiscal linkages for economic development. Drawing from Hirschman's insights, Aguirre Uncita underscores the need for political capacity to not only tax mining activities effectively but also invest the resulting revenues in ways that diversify and expand the national economy. However, the resource curse thesis, another framework employed by the author, warns of the mismanagement, inefficiency, or even misappropriation of revenues from resource extraction. Aguirre Uncita cites scholars like Audi, McGurk, and Crivelli, who have pointed out how resource wealth can lead countries into unsustainable consumption patterns, inefficient investments, and weakened incentives to develop other economic sectors. These tendencies, the author explains, are often exacerbated by institutional weaknesses and rent-seeking behaviors. Aguirre Uncita also explores the correlation between resource abundance and stagnation in social and economic development, referencing studies that show how extractive wealth can lead to neglect in crucial areas such as education, healthcare, and poverty alleviation. He contextualizes this within Zambia's experience during the commodity boom of the early 2000s, and the subsequent fluctuations in copper prices. The author examines whether Zambia's fiscal regime has responded effectively to the principle of ability to tax, and whether initiatives such as local content policies have successfully promoted productive linkages. The article further evaluates the size and financial impact of mining revenues on Zambia's national budget, analyzing how these funds have been utilized in infrastructure development, particularly roads, and social spending on education and health. Aguirre Uncida critically assesses whether these public policies have contributed to improving Zambia's human development indicators and reducing poverty, providing a nuanced understanding of the interplay between resource wealth and socio-economic progress. Through this meticulous analysis, Rafael Aguirre Uncida's study offers valuable insights into the dynamics of resource exploitation in Zambia. Published in 2021, this work remains a significant contribution to the ongoing dialogue on how resource-rich developing countries like Zambia can harness their natural wealth to achieve sustainable and inclusive economic growth. Rafael's work reveals the layers of complexity behind economic indicators, painting a vivid picture of how numbers often reflect an approximation of reality rather than the absolute truth. This is particularly true in sub-Saharan Africa, where informal businesses dominate, old statistical methods linger, and national statistical capacities often fall short. He explains that Zambia, like several other nations, faced the challenge of recalibrating its national accounts. In 2014, the country revised its GDP calculations, shifting its benchmark from 1994 to 2010. This wasn't just a clerical adjustment. It resulted in GDP figures for earlier years being 20 to 25% higher than previously reported, a striking revelation supported by data from the IMF. What makes this even more captivating is Rafael's acknowledgement that while these adjustments offer greater accuracy, discrepancies still exist among data sources, such as the IMF, World Bank, and national institutions. Mining revenues, a central focus of this article, pose their own set of complications. Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, EITI, reports are a cornerstone for this data, yet distinguishing between payments derived from business margins and those tied to VAT accounting adds a layer of difficulty. Rafael's meticulous attention to these statistical intricacies isn't just academic, it's about understanding the heartbeat of Zambia's economy. Now, when Rafael dives into Zambia's broader economic and social profile, things get even more interesting. Imagine a country experiencing rapid population growth, about 3% annually over the last decade, while grappling with shifting economic dynamics. Between 2006 and 2012, during a mining boom, GDP grew at an impressive 8.1%. But the momentum slowed, with growth tapering off to 3.6% between 2013 and 2019. And while services continue to rise, the contributions from agriculture and manufacturing are on the decline. It's like a seesaw, where different sectors shift the balance of the economy. But here's the kicker: despite this growth, Zambia faces immense challenges. Poverty remains a grim reality, with nearly 59% of the population living on less than $1.90 per day as of 2015. Inequality is among the highest in Africa, with a Gini coefficient of 57.1, and the Human Development Index has inched forward only slightly since 2010, barely rising above the sub-Saharan average. These figures tell a story not just of economic progress but of disparity and struggle, one that Rafael skillfully unpacks with both depth and empathy. Adding another layer to this narrative is the growing debt burden. Over the last 7 to 8 years, Zambia's gross government debt has surged to a staggering 91.6% of GDP by the end of 2019. Debt servicing alone consumed over 31% of the country's exports that same year. This paints a sobering picture of the pressures on Zambia's fiscal space, even as it seeks to balance growth with debt sustainability. Rafael's exploration of Zambia's mining history takes us back to the days when copper exploitation was under the control of colonial powers and later private corporations, like the Anglo-American Corporation and the Rhodesian Selection Trust. Post-independence, under President Kenneth Kaunda, the government took bold steps to nationalize the mines, acquiring a majority stake in 1969 and eventually forming the Zambia Consolidated Copper Mines (ZCCM) in 1982. It's a tale of ambition but also of challenges. By the time ZCCM was formed, copper prices had plummeted, having from their highs in the early 1970s and continuing their downward spiral. This slump, compounded by overpricing during the acquisition of mining shares, poor investments outside the sector, and clientelist networks, contributed to inefficiencies and declining production. What Raphael achieves through this detailed analysis is nothing short of remarkable. He connects Zambia's statistical challenges, socio-economic realities, and historical decisions in mining to create a tapestry that not only educates but also engages. It's a story of numbers, policies, and human resilience, all tied together in a way that leaves you wanting to learn more about this extraordinary country. And there's still more to unravel in his work, so stay tuned as we dive deeper into Raphael Aguirre Uncida's study on Zambia. Imagine this, it's the 1990s, and Zambia finds itself at a crossroads. The state's grip on the mining sector, especially copper, the backbone of the economy, was slipping. Enter the Bretton Woods institutions, armed with the neoliberal doctrine of the Washington Consensus, pressing Zambia to embrace privatization. And so, in 1995, the Mines and Minerals Act was born, setting the stage to lure private investment into Zambia's mining sector. But here's the catch: privatization came with a hefty price. While it did help recapitalize the mines and increase copper production, it left the state with only minority stakes in the newly private mining companies, just 10 to 20% ownership. Through ZCCM, Zambia consolidated copper mines investments holdings. The state tried to maintain a say in the sector. However, the dividends from these investments were scarce, arriving years later, in 2014, after the state had already borne the burdens of legacy debts, pensions, and environmental cleanup. This wasn't just a financial hiccup. It was a long, drawn-out struggle for Zambia to assert its stake in its own resources. Now, let's fast forward to the early 2000s. Copper prices were skyrocketing globally, but guess what? Zambia was barely seeing any of that wealth. Shockingly, between 2000 and 2007, less than 1% of the national budget came from the mines. This was a boiling point. Civil society, political parties, and even donors demanded more equitable revenue sharing from mining profits. The government finally took a stand in 2008 with the Mines and Minerals Development Act. They tore up the old development agreements, which had heavily favored investors, and introduced stricter environmental obligations, increased taxes, and local hiring preferences. It was a bold move, but not without resistance. Mining companies pushed back hard, and even a windfall tax, meant to capture excess profits during high copper prices, was shelved after just a few months. Zambia wasn't done experimenting though. After the Patriotic Front took power in 2011, the fiscal regime saw even more changes, especially in royalties. Rates swung up and down, reflecting attempts to balance revenue needs with the profitability of mining companies. By 2019, yet another adjustment raised royalty rates, especially for high copper prices. But again, mining companies cried foul, warning of reduced investments and job cuts. So, here's the challenge Raphael Aguirre Uncida lays out for us. Zambia's mining taxation has been anything but stable. Imagine this. A whopping 10 changes to the mining tax regime in just 16 years. That kind of unpredictability doesn't just scare off investors. It complicates tax collection itself. Weak institutional capacity, inconsistent policies, and even limited access to crucial company data have made managing mining taxes a Herculean task. But let's not forget, this isn't just about taxes, it's about fairness. Zambia relies heavily on royalties because they're easier to collect, but they don't always capture the full potential of booming copper markets. And profit taxes? Well, they're trickier to manage and open the door to tax evasion through shady accounting practices, like transfer pricing. Studies have revealed significant fiscal losses from such practices in Zambia, leaving us with this burning question. How can Zambia balance attracting investors while ensuring its people benefit from their country's natural wealth? Raphael Aguirre Uncida's deep dive into Zambia's mining saga leaves us with a sobering reality. It's a tale of struggle, adaptation, and resilience. The story of how a nation wrestles with global forces, local challenges, and its own aspirations for equity. And it's not over yet. There's still so much to learn from Zambia's journey. In his study conducted in Zambia, Rafael Aguirre Uncita delves deep into the concept of productive linkages through local content policies. Now, let's unpack what that means. Essentially, it's about how countries can develop stronger connections between their local businesses and industries, especially in the context of mining and extractive sectors, so that indigenous firms can contribute more to the value added in production processes. For Zambia, this is key to ensuring that its natural resources aren't just exported for raw extraction, but are also processed and utilized locally in ways that boost the economy. Local content strategies, as Aguirre Uncita highlights, aim to promote domestic participation in these sectors, whether through the supply of goods and services or the processing of raw materials. The idea here is to create a situation where local firms are not just spectators in the value chain but are active participants. This can happen in the backward phase, which involves supplying goods and services to the mining or extraction industries, or in the forward phase, where these raw materials are transformed or marketed. What's important to note here is that these local content policies aren't just about keeping things local for the sake of it. They are designed with a vision to diversify the economy and reduce Zambia's long-term dependence on mining and extractive industries. The goal is to use the revenue generated by these sectors to foster other industries and create a more robust, diversified economy. However, this diversification comes with its own set of challenges, and local content policies are one tool used to address them. Zambia has indeed tried to implement such strategies through various policies and legal instruments. These include the Mineral Resources Development Policy 2013 and the National Local Content Strategy 2018-2022. The country has also put in place specific acts like the Zambia Development Agency Act 2006 and the Citizens Economic Empowerment Act 2006, which lay the groundwork for the preference of Zambian products, contractors, and employment in the extractive industries. But it's not all smooth sailing. When we take a closer look at the results, there are some troubling signs. For instance, a report from the Ministry of Mines in 2020, which refers to data from 2019, shows that only about 2.1% of the total goods and services procured by the mining industry came from Zambian-owned firms. This clearly shows there's a huge gap in what's being targeted by these local content policies and what is actually being achieved. A key problem is that Zambia's local content provisions are not fully developed. For example, the MMD Act, Mining and Minerals Development Act, despite being revised in 2015, lacks clear definitions of what counts as local and does not set specific procurement targets. More concerning, there are no systems in place to monitor, enforce, or evaluate these provisions effectively. These flaws in the policy framework make it difficult for the country to reap the full benefits of its extractive industries, even though these sectors contribute significantly to the economy. It's also important to note the wider criticisms that have been made about Zambia's local content strategies. Scholars and researchers have pointed out that the country's policies tend to be too vague and are often undercut by broader economic challenges, like a weak regulatory environment, limited technological capacity, and the high cost of doing business. Add to this the power imbalance between the state and multinational companies, and it becomes clear why Zambia's local content policies haven't been as successful as hoped. In comparison to other African countries such as Ghana, Nigeria, and South Africa, Zambia has made far less progress with local content. But it's worth mentioning that in neighboring countries like Uganda, Tanzania, and Mozambique, the situation is relatively similar, indicating that the challenges Zambia faces are not unique. A notable initiative Zambia introduced is the Multi-Facility Economic Zones, FEZs, particularly the one set up in Shambishi in 2006. This zone, next to a Chinese-run copper mine, was meant to attract local and foreign firms involved in mining-related processing and services. However, local firms' involvement has been minimal. Many local businesses simply haven't been able to meet the technological and skills requirements to thrive in these zones. In fact, these zones have been described as white elephants because they have not delivered the expected benefits for local enterprises. Now, what about the broader picture? Despite efforts to boost local content and diversify the economy, Zambia's economy still heavily depends on mining, and progress has been slow. In the years following independence, Zambia did experience a process of economic diversification, particularly in the manufacturing sector, thanks to a favorable economic environment driven by high copper prices. However, that momentum was lost as the country faced economic challenges, including falling copper prices and the structural weaknesses of its industrial policies. In recent decades, public policies aimed at promoting local content and economic diversification have largely been ineffective. Mining revenue could have been used to invest in other key sectors, but instead, much of it has been directed elsewhere, like to low-productivity sectors such as retail and informal trading. Despite this, the country's economic structure remains largely unchanged, and many of the productive sectors, such as agriculture and manufacturing, continue to face major challenges. So, as we reflect on the local content strategy in Zambia, it's clear that while there have been some efforts, the results have been modest. Raphael Aguirre Uncida's study offers us a critical lens to view the current state of Zambia's local content policies and how they have, so far, struggled to deliver the desired outcomes of economic diversification and local business empowerment. Whether Zambia can overcome these challenges and successfully implement a productive local content strategy will depend on how the country addresses these underlying issues and strengthens its policy framework. Moving forward, let's talk about Zambia's mining taxation and its impact on public revenue, as studied by Raphael Aguirre Uncida. Now, this is a topic that might sound complex at first, but let's break it down in a way that's easy to understand. So, Raphael Aguirre Uncida, conducting this study in Zambia, explores something that has been on the minds of many. How does the new 2019 mining taxation affect Zambia's public revenue? Here's the thing. While Zambia's new mining taxation regime might seem like a game changer, predicting its medium-term effects is tricky. Yes, the potential for revenue is huge, but several factors are at play. For one, there's how investors respond to these new rules, along with how global market prices trend, which were very favorable starting in 2020. Plus, the ability of the Zambian government to manage these changes effectively also plays a huge role in how much tax revenue they can actually collect. So, it's really a bit of a waiting game, isn't it? Now, how do we measure the government's share of the wealth generated by mining activities? Well, that's where the concept of the average effective tax rate, ATR, comes in. In simpler terms, the ATR shows how much of the income from mining projects ends up in the government's hands. It's not an easy figure to calculate, but it's the most sophisticated way of assessing public participation in the mining boom. The ATR is based on projections about what the government could earn under the current laws, but it doesn't reflect the actual flow of money. In Zambia's case, past studies have estimated ATRs ranging from 30 to 60%, depending on the mining sector. But when looking at the actual recorded data, these figures often fall short. And that brings us to an interesting point. 2018 might have seen a peak in this ATR, largely due to the impact of VAT payments by mining companies. If we look at the chart, figure 2, from the study, we see how the ATR in Zambia fluctuates. The biggest jump in the ATR occurred in 2015 when royalty rates surged up to 20%. But this hike was only temporary, and the higher rates didn't last long. It's fascinating to see how Zambia's mining taxation landscape has evolved. Raphael also looks at a broader picture by comparing Zambia with other copper-producing countries. In Figure 3, the ATR levels of Zambia are compared with countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC. What stands out here is the sharp rise in the DRC's ATR after adopting a new mining code in 2018. This could have influenced Zambia's decision to adjust its own mining tax system in 2019. After all, Zambia and DRC are direct competitors in the Copperbelt region, and the tax changes in one country can have a big impact on the other. Now let's move to something else that Raphael digs into: the overall evolution of Zambia's public finances. Mining revenue has been a significant source of income for Zambia. Over the past decade, it has contributed between 25% and 35% of the total national revenue, depending on the year. But let's pause here for a moment and consider this. How does this mining revenue impact Zambia's overall financial health? Raphael looks at the ratio of total domestic revenue to GDP, a good indicator of the country's financial strength. Over time, this ratio has fluctuated. From 2004 to 2009, the ratio was on a slight decline, but after 2009, it started climbing. Mining revenue, of course, played a part in this recovery. However, when you subtract mining-related revenues from the total, the story changes. The non-mining revenues didn't grow as fast as the overall revenue did, suggesting that Zambia's dependence on mining might be holding it back from developing a more diversified and robust revenue base. Raphael also dives into a theory that you might have heard about before, the so-called resource curse. Several studies have shown that countries rich in natural resources, like Zambia with its copper, sometimes experience negative effects from these wealths. Why? Because easy money from resources can discourage governments from improving their tax systems. In Zambia's case, it means that the country hasn't been able to build a tax system that brings in enough revenue from the non-extractive sectors. But it doesn't stop there. Zambia's public finances have also been affected by a reduction in foreign aid over the past 15 years. This has left Zambia with fewer financial resources to meet its growing fiscal needs. The country has had to borrow more, including through the issuance of Eurobonds, which has led to a huge rise in public debt. In fact, Zambia's public debt skyrocketed, more than quadrupling since 2011, hitting 90% of GDP by 2019. And if you look at how much of Zambia's domestic revenue goes into paying off debt, 46.1% in 2019 alone, it's clear that the country is facing serious fiscal strain. Raphael's study also suggests that Zambia has been living beyond its means, particularly by not saving enough during good times to cushion itself when the copper market downturns. This is a classic case of the resource curse, where Zambia's reliance on copper revenue has resulted in overspending during boom years and a failure to reduce spending when prices fall. This kind of instability, coupled with inadequate fiscal policies, has contributed to Zambia's rising debt. In short, Raphael Aguirre Uncida's study gives us a detailed look at how Zambia's public finances have evolved in the face of fluctuating mining revenues, the challenges posed by a reliance on copper, and the political pressures that have shaped fiscal decisions. While Zambia has made some strides in managing its mining wealth, the country still faces significant challenges in building a more resilient and diversified economy. Stay tuned because there's even more to come on this fascinating journey into Zambia's financial world, and Raphael's insights are going to help us understand it all better. Now let's take a deep dive into the fascinating study conducted by Raphael Aguirre Uncida on Zambia, focusing on the relationship between productive public capital, human capital, and poverty, as well as how investments in infrastructure like roads and social services like education and healthcare play crucial roles in reducing poverty. This analysis sheds light on how Zambia's development challenges could be addressed, especially in the face of the so-called resource curse. So, here's the story. Zambia, like many developing nations, has faced a tough balancing act. The IMF and other international organizations often suggest creating sovereign reserve funds to save revenues from natural resources, especially the extractive sectors like mining. However, in countries with limited infrastructure and human capital, like Zambia, this approach has been questioned. Instead, experts argue that the priority should be to invest those resources locally, building up the nation's physical and human assets to benefit the current generation, especially since many people in Zambia still live in poverty. This brings us to an important aspect of the study, the role of public infrastructure investment, particularly in roads. Over the past decade, Zambia's government has made substantial investments in its road network. This has been one of the main areas benefiting from the rising public debt, with funding for roads increasing from just 1.4% of GDP in 2007 to 2009 to more than 3% of GDP in 2014 to 2015. A significant example is the Link Zambia 8000 road construction program, launched in 2012, funded by both domestic resources and foreign loans, such as from Eurobonds and the Exim Bank of China. This ambitious project aimed to improve the country's transport infrastructure, especially in a landlocked nation like Zambia. The government's investment in roads makes perfect sense because better transport reduces bottlenecks and promotes economic diversification, particularly moving away from a mining-dominated economy. But here's the catch. While road infrastructure is indeed important, the way the investments have been managed has raised some concerns. Most of the funds have been allocated to upgrading paved roads and expanding the road network, sometimes through projects that didn't have the economic justification to match their costs. In fact, by 2014, around 82% of the country's feeder roads were in poor condition, affecting rural access and undermining the potential benefits of the larger road network. Experts, including Rafael Aguirre Uncida, note that Zambia's road projects often suffer from inefficiency due to poor planning, lack of competitive tendering, and inadequate monitoring of contracts. For example, the costs of road construction projects in Zambia are significantly higher than those in comparable African nations. Furthermore, the management of Zambia's road investments has been criticized for lacking the necessary technical capacity to ensure the proper planning, selection, and oversight of projects. In fact, the country's public investment management system has been described as inadequate, leading to an estimated efficiency loss of 45% in public investments, significantly higher than the 36% average in sub-Saharan Africa. These inefficiencies highlight the importance of developing not only infrastructure but also the systems and capacities required to manage such investments effectively. Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about social spending, especially in sectors like education and healthcare. This is where human capital comes into play. Aguirre Uncida's study emphasizes that both physical and human capital are essential for Zambia's industrial development. Interestingly, while Zambia has prioritized human development, including education and health, the financial resources allocated to these sectors have been somewhat limited. When it comes to education, there was a positive shift during the mining boom from 2011 to 2014, with spending on education increasing. However, the share of the national budget allocated to education has since decreased, falling below the sub-Saharan average. Even though more money has been spent on teachers, this hasn't translated into improved quality of education. Zambia continues to struggle with high repetition and dropout rates, and the amount spent on teaching materials remains low. On the positive side, Zambia has made notable strides in increasing school attendance. Primary school attendance rose from 57% in 2004 to almost 79% in 2018. In terms of healthcare, there has been a similar pattern. Government spending on health increased from 2009 to 2014 but saw some contraction afterward. However, the health sector has received significant support from external resources, particularly in the form of international aid. In fact, government spending on health as a share of the national budget rose to 48% by 2014 to 2015, although it later dropped again. The government has made strides in improving health outcomes, particularly in combating HIV/AIDS, where Zambia has seen a reduction in the proportion of adults living with the virus. Life expectancy has also improved, largely due to access to free antiretroviral treatment. However, despite these positive developments, there are still significant challenges, such as insufficient investment in healthcare infrastructure, medical equipment, and essential drugs, which hampers the quality of care provided. What's fascinating in Rafael Aguirre Uncida's study is that, despite the challenges Zambia faces in education and healthcare, the country has managed to make progress in these sectors, even if slower than desired. The increase in life expectancy, school attendance, and reduced child mortality points to improvements, although quality still remains an issue. In conclusion, the study sheds light on Zambia's attempts to balance the benefits of natural resource revenue with the development of public capital and human capital. While there's clear potential in Zambia's infrastructure development, especially in the road sector, there are significant concerns about how investments are being managed. Moreover, while social spending in education and health has increased, it hasn't been sufficient to overcome existing challenges. Still, there are glimpses of progress, and it's evident that Zambia needs to focus on improving both the quantity and quality of investments in infrastructure, education, and healthcare. So, as we continue this exploration of Zambia's development journey, remember the insights of Rafael Aguirre Uncida, who is showing us that the path to progress isn't just about adding more roads or schools. It's about ensuring that these investments are managed efficiently and translated into tangible improvements for the people of Zambia. Stay tuned, because there's more to uncover from this in-depth study. Imagine living in a country where, despite years of economic growth, more than half of the population is still struggling to make ends meet. This is the reality in Zambia, as revealed by Rafael Aguirre Uncida's study, which looks at the ongoing issue of poverty. In 2015, over 54% of Zambia's population was living below the national poverty line, and nearly 41% were facing extreme poverty. It's a situation that, despite some positive trends in past years, remains deeply entrenched, especially when we look at international poverty lines. To put it simply, the financial gap between Zambia's wealthiest and poorest is widening, and the inequality is becoming more pronounced. Now, let's talk about where poverty is hitting hardest. It's primarily in the rural areas, where around 85% of those living in extreme poverty are found. A lot of this is due to the low productivity in agriculture, with most farmers relying heavily on maize, a crop that's vulnerable to the unpredictability of rainfall. And though agriculture has received attention in the form of subsidies, these have not been effective in reducing rural poverty. Despite some favorable climatic conditions in the early 2000s, the agricultural growth in Zambia has been inconsistent, with a marked downturn from 2012 onward. Crop yields have fluctuated wildly, sometimes even leading to food deficits. The challenge is that Zambia has devoted so much of its budget to agricultural subsidies, leaving little room for programs that could help build a more resilient farming sector. For instance, diversification away from maize, irrigation, and extension services have all taken a back seat. When we dive deeper into the issue, we find that many of the beneficiaries of these subsidies are actually better off farmers, while the poorest are left struggling to make a living. In addition to agriculture, Zambia's Social Cash Transfer (SCT) program is another attempt to alleviate poverty. While it has been slightly more successful, the budget allocated to it has remained under 1% of Zambia's total spending, and there's still a significant gap between what's approved and what's actually disbursed. Though this program has shown promise when well implemented, its limited funding is a major barrier to its effectiveness, and the issue of food insecurity is no small matter either. Despite an increase in agricultural production between 2000 and 2012, food insecurity remains a major issue, with Zambia ranking among the worst in the world for hunger, with nearly 47% of the population undernourished. That's almost double the average for sub-Saharan Africa. So, despite some years of macroeconomic growth, poverty remains deeply rooted, particularly in rural areas. Rafael Aguirre Uncita's study highlights a disappointing truth. Even though Zambia's economic profile has improved, moving into the group of lower middle-income countries since 2011, poverty remains widespread. One key reason behind this is the mineral wealth Zambia holds, which, rather than lifting the population out of poverty, has, in many ways, failed to create lasting change. The phenomenon known as the resource curse may help explain why Zambia, despite its vast mining resources, has not been able to reduce poverty significantly. Aguirre's research sheds light on how Zambia's mining sector, though generating significant revenue, has not contributed to a broader economic transformation. Despite fluctuations in revenue, mining's potential to fund development has been undermined by inconsistent taxation and poor policy execution. The fluctuation of global copper prices, a major revenue source, and mismanagement of public funds have meant that the benefits of Zambia's mineral wealth have been neither consistent nor equitably distributed. In conclusion, while the exploitation of Zambia's mining resources has brought in some revenue, the impact on poverty reduction has been minimal. The agriculture sector, which could be a key driver of poverty alleviation, has been hindered by poor policy choices and a lack of support for small-scale farmers. There's been no real structural transformation in the economy, and the mining sector has failed to create sustainable growth or improve the living conditions for the majority of the population. Aguirre's study offers a sobering view of Zambia's economic trajectory, but it also presents an opportunity to learn from past mistakes and ensure that the revenue from Zambia's natural resources is used more effectively. Moving forward, strong institutions and clear, well-executed policies are crucial if Zambia is to escape the grip of poverty and turn its mineral wealth into lasting prosperity for all its citizens. It's time to rethink the future of Zambia and use the lessons of the past to build a more inclusive and sustainable future for everyone, especially the most vulnerable in the rural areas. And just like that, we've come to the end of our review of Rafael Aguirre Uncita's insightful study on Zambia's economic and social landscape, especially focusing on poverty, mining resources, and agricultural policies. It's been an eye-opening journey through the complexities that Zambia faces, from persistent poverty in rural areas to the challenges in using mining revenue for meaningful development. Aguirre's work sheds light on crucial aspects like the inefficiency of subsidies and the lack of strong local content policies, which hinder progress. His findings are not just relevant to Zambia but resonate with many nations grappling with similar issues. Before we wrap up, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay updated on more insightful content like this. We'll continue bringing you stories, research, and discussions that matter. Thank you for joining us today, and stay tuned for more.